Welcome to the Life You Love podcast.
We're your hosts, Grace Lemire
and Erin Convertini.
This podcast is for the dreamers and the doers.
For the women who want to create a life they genuinely love waking up to.
We believe that life's short, so let's build one we love.
We have obviously talked countless times on the podcast about making more money and also saving money. And one of the best ways to do both of those things is by mastering the skill of negotiating. Today's guest, Baska, is a negotiation expert. And this was such an awesome conversation of skills to have in your back pocket throughout your life to increase your salary and negotiate all of your biggest purchases to have more money to hit your financial goals.
Welcome to the podcast, Mal. We just gave a little introduction on who you are, but we would love if you could kick us off with your own intro. Give us the tea. Who are you? How'd you get into negotiation?
Well, hey everyone. I'm Mal. I'm your millennial money mother. That's what I'm going to call myself here. Because I joke with Erin and Grace that they are my Gen Z inspiration queens. And I know that most of the audience here probably leans more into that demographic. So for context, age is just a number, but I am 34 and I'm a mom of almost two. I'm having a baby, my second child any day now, like literally could be tomorrow. We'll see. And so I've been around the block, I guess, a couple more times than Erin and Grace. That doesn't mean I'm smarter, but I have definitely focused a lot of my money moves and my big wins with money stemmed from not just learning how to manage my money and, allocate money in ways that helped elevate my life and also save for my future. But I spent a longer period of time in corporate America. I am now a full-time entrepreneur, just like Erin and Grace, but I did spend 11 years in corporate America. So for me, the biggest way to move the needle and increase that gap between income and expenses was negotiation. And that became a skill that I really focused on strengthening so that I could get ahead, so that I didn't have to constrict my lifestyle in order to save more, invest more, or just do the big things that I wanted to do, like buy the home. And obviously having kids is not inexpensive. So yeah, that's kind of how I got started with negotiation. And then, once you start strengthening, we'll talk about it, but once you start strengthening your negotiation muscle, it really starts to snowball. And when I started my little corner of the internet account online, it just became a very hot topic. And so it's now something that I talk about regularly.
I love this conversation so much because we obviously talk about increasing your income on this podcast, but it's almost always through the lens of like multiple streams of income, side hustles, making money online, because that's what we know and what we do. I have very limited corporate America experience and I have never once negotiated my salary. It was just kind of like, okay, I'm graduating from college, like whatever I can get. And I never thought to negotiate like an annual raise or my annual bonus or anything like that. So when would you say, and I know we're going to talk in this episode about not just salary negotiation, because you talk a lot about different types of negotiation and different things that you can use to save money in different aspects. But when it comes to salary negotiation, at what point in your career did you realize that that could be a really big tool to move the needle?
Probably about 2 years in. So like you, and I think like most college grads, it's not super easy, especially in this job market, to negotiate from the jump when you're just graduating. I would always say my advice right now would always say, still try. The worst they can say is no. They're never going to retract an offer from you if you're negotiating appropriately. But it is harder when you're just starting out. So about 2 to 3 years into my career, I realized, hey, I can kind of see what's going on in the job market. I can look at these resources online. There are tons of, the Glassdoors of the world, the pay scales of the world, online resources where you can look at competitive pay for your like position at different companies and things of that nature. And I realized, hey, I should start advocating for myself. And some of that came with also getting really good feedback in my job. So I started working, I built a rapport at my company, and I was delivering results. I was doing what they told me to do in my job and more. And so it became a natural part of the conversation in like my year-end reviews and things of that nature, where at the end of the day, your management decides what raise you're going to get. Are you going to be the 1% raise or are you going to be the 5% raise? So that's when I learned, hey, I've really got to start advocating for myself and negotiating appropriately. So about 2 to 3 years into my career. And then my first big negotiation win happened 3 years into my career, like 3.5 to 4 years. I was at my second company, and it's kind of a long story, so I'm going to try and make it short, but I did a lot of research before I moved to that company. So we probably have all heard job hopping can be one easy way to increase your income. So I had a pretty big income increase from my first company to my second company because I did do thorough research when I investigated that job and I knew what to ask for. But about a year after working there, I was performing, I was getting all of the accolades, you could say, contributing to the business, getting more responsibilities put on my plate. And I happened to be in a one-on-one discussion with a male peer of mine who, while he was more experienced as far as much older than me and many more years on his resume, our job titles were in the same pay band. So the way that we were contributing to the business was equal. And this guy, I always call him Bob. I don't want to use his real name, but so Bob, he was one of those people, he did his job and he went home. He didn't cause drama. He didn't underperform, but he was wow, Bob is great. We just so happened to be in a conversation. He was really nice and really talkative and kind of an overshare. So this wasn't like an egotistical thing that was spewing out of his mouth, but he was just telling me how him and his wife were buying a new house and they were going through the mortgage process, which obviously there's all sorts of income verification involved. And he told me his salary. And he was making $30,000 more than me. And I was like, I wish I could have been a fly on the wall and seen my face in that. But it made me realize, okay, this company has money. And while I thought I was getting paid well, I could be getting paid a lot more. And anyways, then everything kind of snowballed from there. So I won't get into the whole story of how I negotiated after I found out Bob's salary, but I did go in and I did negotiate and I did get a 30% raise in one day. And I never mentioned that I knew Bob's salary, but really just some experiences that I worked through and conversations with people who I'm thankful that Bob shared that. But then later down the road, I learned how talking to people in the right way with the right approach can really help you understand your worth and kind of the zone of opportunity, as I like to call it, and what you can negotiate for.
Before we get into some of the nitty gritty on what people should negotiate and how to negotiate and things like that, I would love to hear your thoughts on why people should negotiate, just overarching, but especially why it is so important for women. Because I feel like you talked about advocating for yourself as you were talking about going to negotiate your salary. And I know that that is a big theme, especially for women. And our podcast is mostly women that listen. So I would love to hear your thoughts on negotiation as a woman.
Yes. Okay. So I'll start with number one, the first question: why should we negotiate? And the easy, short answer is we live in a capitalist economy. Whether you like a capitalist economy or not, the fact is we live in a capitalist economy, which means that everything is negotiable. Truly. Businesses set the price. You come with them. If you come to them and you know what to say, at the end of the day, you're making a purchase agreement with every transaction and every job offer that you accept. Obviously, some things are going to be more negotiable than others. I would never recommend negotiating your morning coffee at Starbucks. You're probably not going to get anywhere with a barista who has zero power to change the price. But at the end of the day, we live in a capitalist economy and everything is negotiable. I was listening to a podcast actually last week. Cody Sanchez, she's a big business entrepreneur, guru, and negotiator. And she said what she has learned in her career. And I thought this was so true. I don't like to use the terms like rich and poor because I don't know. I just don't like to label people as that. But this was her direct quote. So just to get the gist across, what she said was the rich set price, whereas the poor accept price. And if you want to be rich, again, this is her quote. I don't like the words rich and poor, but if you want to be rich, you have got to start having the conversations where you're setting the price with people versus just accepting it. And has completely rung true with my life. I don't classify myself as rich, but I have done very well financially and made a lot of progress on my own, and my negotiation muscle has been a huge. So to answer your second question, as a woman, why it's so important, I think it all boils down to, for the most part, and we're making some progress, we're getting better about this, but for the most part, any woman who is of adult age right now to be making adulting decisions, adult purchases, and working adult jobs, careers, we most likely grew up in a society that very much, whether directly or indirectly, instilled women are here to kind of, serve people and to cater to people and to just always express gratitude for our lives. And so it can be very easy, and also to you don't want to be the one that starts the conflict, right? As a girl, you don't want to be the mean girl. You don't want to be the one that's always ruffling feathers. It's kind of the, I think, again, subconsciously or consciously talk track that we learn growing up is you want to be accommodating, you want to be helpful, and you want to be a grateful human as a woman. And the problem with that is it creates more hesitancy for us to really speak up and ask for what we're worth, or to push back in conversations like, say, the purchase of a car, for example, when things just aren't adding up and you should be negotiating. So because of that, there's a lot of data behind the success of women negotiating is much lower than success of men. And this is kind of changed depending on what data source you look at, but there's a lot of data behind how many women are actually negotiating, like salary, for example, versus men. And most of the data sources that I see, women are not asking for or not negotiating as much as men are. And just based on data, if more men are asking, right, more men are going to be receiving probably higher pay. And that then contributes to the pay gap, right? So there's a lot of things that contribute to the pay gap. But if more men are asking for more money more frequently, their success rate is naturally going to be higher. And that can kind of contribute to the pay gap. So I think that the big thing is just, act like a man. Sometimes you've got to, and you can do so in an eloquent way. Always tell people, especially women, especially younger women, change your mindset from thinking about negotiation as conflict, because it's not. Start thinking about it as a win-win solution. You are trying to present something to a company, for in the case of salary, that is a win-win. Because if you're paid appropriately and you're really happy as an employee, your contributions to the business are going to be greater, which is a win for the company. And you're probably going to be a more tenured employee that is more committed, reduces turn, and things of that nature. So you have to think about these conversations as a collaboration that is seeking a win-win outcome, not a me versus you conflict type of scenario, because I think it's natural for us to think that's going to present conflict and that feels awkward. And so I'm just going to accept this and move on, when in reality, you should probably be negotiating.
Yeah, it does come across as like a very awkward topic of conversation, but something we talk about on the podcast all the time is how money is an exchange of value. And you brought up how you saw your coworker's salary, or he told you his salary, and then you took the steps necessary to get a 30% raise. And I'm sure a lot of that had to do with you clearly articulating the value that you bring to the company, because again, like, it is a win-win scenario, but only if they see the value in giving you that 30%. So what are the kind of steps that you take to advocate for yourself and prove that value to your company?
So internally is going to look different than externally. And this is something I cover in my negotiation course, but there's a very different approach to an internal negotiation where everybody already knows you. There's an HR record, for lack of a better term. There's performance history, versus an external company that they know you from a few rounds of interviews and a resume, and you've got to really articulate that. So I'll start with internally. This one, I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's easier to punch home on the value that you bring to the table when you can go back and literally articulate all of your contributions to the business. You can pull up your past performance history or year-end reviews at any larger company. I always worked for the 3 different companies I worked for in my 11-year corporate tenure were all like Fortune 500. So some smaller companies probably don't have as robust record keeping, but all of the companies I looked for, you could go to your HR portal and you could pull up every year-end review and like the feedback that your manager submitted. I mean, the data was there. And so if you ever needed to find that documentation to help you articulate in a conversation, it was there. I think it's also smart to do this on your own and kind of keep track of the wins that you have, or even just the compliments and praises that your management has given you, so that you can reference them. So that's what you're going to want to lean on when you are negotiating internally. So for me, for example, I mentioned I didn't come into my manager and say, I found out that Bob makes $90,000 and I need to make $90,000. Of course, that's not going to go over well, right? That's not presenting a win-win situation. I actually came in, and my boss's name was Candy at the time. And I knew that Candy couldn't function without, she could function without me, but she very much valued my work ethic and what I brought to the table. And so I came in and I just, first off, you want to start with kind of stroking their ego, for lack of a better term. Hey, I really loved working here. I love this job. I love what we've been able to do with the business and taking it X to Y or whatever it may be. And then you get into the, but I'm feeling like right now, my contributions to the business are more aligned with this pay. And I'm obviously oversimplifying this, but start by stroking their ego and then basically make your presentation, which needs to be data backed. One of the main reasons why negotiations fail is people aren't doing effective market research and they're asking for something that's like, hey, that just isn't really aligned with your position or your location, right? You can't say, oh, well, a marketing manager makes $200,000 in Seattle and I live in Kansas City and I need to make 200,000. Location is obviously a factor too. So then you present your ask and then you've kind of just got to let them take it away. And that's where it's really important to shut up, for lack of a better term. Shut up and let them answer. Once you have articulated the value that you bring to the table and told them, hey, I really love all of the aspects about this company and this role, and let them do the work. Because I think that's where also women can make the mistake of just keep talking because things are awkward and then going in circles. And it's like, no, let's get straight to the point, present your ask and see what they can do for you. In my case, in that specific situation, Candy was like, I completely agree. And I'm going to take this to our VP, who is her boss, and we're going to see what we can do. And then a couple hours later, my VP called me and said, hey, I also agree. And I got this approved with HR and this is your new compensation package. So you just got to ask. If you're not asking, no manager or VP or HR partner who manages a budget is going to come to you and say, hey, we've got money to spend. You should ask for a $30,000 raise. Nobody's going to come. People who ask are the people who are going to get it. That's the internal approach. Externally, it's going to look a little bit differently because it's an external position, right? So you want to lean more on the value that you think you can bring to the table based on your external experience and how that would differentiate from maybe an internal candidate that they could hire or, any sort of other external candidate. And external is actually a little bit easier to negotiate in my experience and just in the experience that I see from my course students, because typically with external hires, there's more of a sliding scale of a budget with an offer. Then once you're internal, it's kind of like you're in a pay band. A lot of times there are parameters put in place by like very, very high levels of management that are like only X% raises can be given at a time. So external is typically much easier. So I always tell people, do not ever, ever, ever fail to negotiate an external offer, because that's where you're going to be able to move the needle the most. And that's also where you can most likely also negotiate benefits like PTO or equity, bonus payouts. All of those sorts of things are very negotiable in an external offer and typically a little bit harder to negotiate once you're inside of a job. Once they know like, hey, like you can't just easily leave tomorrow, it's a little bit harder versus externally. They know, hey, this person could just decline on us. And we just spent all this time interviewing them and all these resources interviewing them. At that point, when they're making you an offer, they want you to accept. So they're more willing to negotiate with you. And there's probably just a little bit more budget to do so.
I love what you were saying about like just ask. And it sounds so simple, but at the same time, it reminds me of the expression closed mouths don't get fed. So like
Sure.
if you really do just like if you don't ever speak up, you're never gonna know, right, what their answer could be. And the worst that happens really is that they say no. I feel like especially if you're already in a job, you asking for a pay increase, they're probably not going to turn around and like fire you. You know what I mean? They're probably just gonna be like, no, actually, like,
No.
But I want to talk a little bit, like pivot just slightly. So I feel like salary conversation is something that a lot of people know that they probably should negotiate their salary, especially externally when they're applying for a new job. But a lot of people are like, I don't want to, I'm scared, whatever. And we just covered that. But what are some other things that people can or should negotiate? Because every time you post like testimonials from your negotiation course, I'm just like amazed at what people are negotiating and how much they're saving. And it has made me think, what other things should I be negotiating that I'm definitely not? Because I do zero negotiation at this point in time. So what are some other things?
Yeah, good question. That new salary is definitely the most straightforward. So the other big things I think most people miss. Number one, any big purchase, a house, a car, you should be negotiating. Whether that be, let's use a house, for example, whether you're negotiating the price on the house, or maybe you're negotiating like lender fees or different rate specials with your lender, assuming you're getting the loan to purchase the house. Any big purchase, you should be negotiating. Sometimes price is going to be harder to move the needle on. Like in today's car market, for example, price may be really hard to move the needle on a Toyota Grand Highlander. And I only know about this car because it's like the mom car of the century. And it's on back order, and like Toyota Grand Highlanders
Wow.
the inventory is very low because it's a new model anyways. So you do have to factor in supply and demand sometimes with housing too. Obviously, if you're going for a really hot house in a really hot market, price may be hard to negotiate, but you never know what you can negotiate on the back end with your lender, or even just like different things with the seller if you're buying a home, or with the builder if you're buying a new home. So for example, for us, we were able to negotiate closing costs with our builder when we bought our home. We bought our home last year, and we do live in a hotter market, for context, in Kansas City, and we live in a very family friendly neighborhood that's in high demand. It's like walking distance to a brand new elementary school, has all of the amenities, all the things for families. And so price was something that we weren't really able to negotiate on, but we were able to negotiate $3,000 in closing costs with the builder that he ended up covering, like kind of just because we asked. I mean, really, there was no reason why he needed to or should have covered that, but really just because we built rapport with him and we asked for it. So every big purchase, you should be negotiating something somewhere. If price doesn't make sense, you've got to think of outside the box to other aspects of the transaction that may be negotiable. Secondly, any sort of reoccurring expense out there like insurance that sits in a very highly competitive market, you should be calling and negotiating your rates annually. Car insurance, homeowners insurance, especially now as those things are rapidly increasing due to just economic factors, you have got to be negotiating. We probably save, I'm not kidding, $1,000 every year just by calling and negotiating our insurance. And sometimes the negotiations are unsuccessful, and then your counter to that is you do just switch from Allstate to Progressive or whatever it is, and then you get the new customer rate with whoever it is that you switch to, and you're saving from there. So that's the second big thing. And then I think the last thing that is most commonly overlooked is medical. And hopefully for a younger audience, you're not experiencing major medical issues, but you never know what could happen. And medical bills, oh my gosh, that is where my course students see the biggest wins. That's where I've seen some of the craziest negotiation wins that I am just like, how are we operating like this? I mean, we all know healthcare in America is questionable right now. But if you are not calling and negotiating, you're probably overpaying to the tune of thousands of dollars, especially if a hospital stay or some sort of more expensive type of visit is involved. So I've gotten to put a lot of my muscle to the test with labor and delivery and all the expenses that come with having a child that are unavoidable, even when you have a very uncomplicated vaginal birth. It's insane what hospitals charge you just to sleep in their bed and put your newborn in like a little plastic cart. Call and negotiate. Negotiating medical bills. My students save thousands all the time negotiating medical bills. So that's a big one. And yeah, those are what I would say the big hitters. Your annual big expenses, any big purchase, medical bills, and then outside of like larger annual subscriptions like insurance, any sort of subscription service where they've got a lot of competition, maybe a cell phone carrier, cable, call and negotiate those annually when they try and hike the price up, because chances are they're trying to reduce churn in their business. They don't want to lose you to competition, and a quick phone call may be able to keep that new customer rate for another year or two.
We did that in college. We negotiated our internet, and we saved like so much money. Like I think it was like $70 a month or something on our Xfinity. The other one is credit card annual fees. If you have a credit card with an annual fee, calling them and being like, hey, is there anything you could do for me? I've been a loyal customer for how long? But can you talk through the process of like logistically how you would negotiate something like a medical bill? Do you call the hospital, figure out what you got charged for? What does that look like?
So first and foremost, we're going to start from like before you even incur the medical expense. You might know that you need to get a procedure done. So I'm going to give an example that happened to me when I was 25. And Grace, you might be able to relate to this because I know you had some of your health issues, and I would never bring those up if you hadn't talked about those before.
No girl, it's out there.
So when I was 25, I started having some crazy like digestive stuff going on, and we were doing everything to try and rule it out. Long story short, I had to get a colonoscopy. It was just something that a gastroenterologist recommended. Getting a colonoscopy is not fun, but obviously I wanted to make sure I didn't have cancer if that was a concern. So I knew I needed to get a colonoscopy. Okay, so there are going to be situations where a doctor is recommending that I go get this procedure done or I get this exam done or whatever it may be. What you should do first is go to your insurance website, or most of them in today's world have pretty user-friendly apps. So I have United Healthcare, for example. You can go on United Healthcare and you can look up different providers in your area and see what it would cost to get a colonoscopy with this gastroenterologist versus this gastroenterologist versus this gastroenterologist. They're all going to do the same thing, right? Obviously, there could be argument over some doctors being better than others, but what you will quickly learn is that like a private practice, a gastroenterologist that operates out of a private practice may have a significantly lower rate through your insurance than the gastroenterologist that has a practice that's owned by a hospital. So shop around first, not only because not all doctors are created equal, but you may find that say, hey, going to this women's imaging center for an ultrasound versus going to like the big hospital ultrasound lab could be a difference of several $100s, even though both are run through your insurance and they're the exact same thing. So shopping around beforehand can be helpful if you know, hey, I'm going to get this and this is what I need. You can't always do that with everything. Like sometimes you have to go to the ER. There's no shopping around. You have to go to the ER. So afterwards, negotiating, you want to start with just reviewing your itemized receipt. Most medical bills just send you a bill and there's no itemization. Always call and ask for an itemized receipt. This may not be necessary if you're like, you got a blood draw. It's a blood draw. Okay. But if you had a hospital stay, if you visited an emergency room, anything like that, ask for an itemized receipt, because there's some statistic out there, and don't quote me on this, but it's like 80% of medical bills have an error on them. And typically that occurs when you're visiting an ER or a hospital and there's a lot of stuff going on. People make mistakes. Most of the time it's nurses that are just entering, this happened, this medication was administered. Sometimes there can be mistakes that are made. And so always ask for an itemized bill, because right there you might be able to find errors. I know someone, for example, that was charged for a circumcision in the hospital for their baby who was a girl. Okay. Obviously that was a mistake. So if you hadn't asked for the itemized receipt, you wouldn't have caught that. And that's going to be on your bill. So always call and ask for itemized receipt. Then next up, okay, if everything's correct or if it's not, you're going to just call the billing department directly for that bill. And that's where you're going to present a basically offer to them of, hey, I can pay this in full today. Would you be able to offer a settlement of 20% discount, 30% discount, whatever it may be. And I have a script, like an exact script of exactly what to say in my negotiation course and how to like counter if they push back. But basically you're just going to call and position them up front like, hey, I will pay this bill and I'd be happy to get this off your books if you could offer me a pay in full discount or settlement discount today. We're never going to bat 100, but more times than not, especially in the setting of a hospital or an ER, they're automatically going to say, yep, we've got a 15% discount for pay in full. You pay this today, you get 15% off. And sometimes if that doesn't work, you can push further and ask if there are any sort of financial assistance programs or anything that they could further look into to help reduce your bill. And a lot of times you might qualify for those as well. Even if you think like, oh, I make way too much money, I would never qualify for that. You'd be surprised. An example that I'll give recently, I had a weird insurance situation, which I won't get into with this pregnancy. I got some genetic screening in my pregnancy. Anyone who hasn't been pregnant before, they can screen for genetic abnormalities if you would like to know about them earlier versus later. So like Down syndrome and some things like that. And so I got that genetic screening. It wasn't covered by my insurance and it was like a $1,200 genetic screening. And so I got the bill for $1,200 because it wasn't, covered by my insurance. And I called, there wasn't a discount that they could offer, but after pushing with the woman on the phone, she said, actually, let me look into this program and see if you can qualify or whatever. And long story short, there was a program. All I had to do was fill out this questionnaire that they sent me, and it was nothing invasive or weird. And it took the bill from $1,200 to $250 just for like basically applying for this program. I forget what it's called, like Moms Supporting Moms. I don't remember, but it was just something random that I asked, and she was like, oh yeah, let me send you this application. If you fill it out, it'll take it to 200. Filled it out, took it to 200. So
Oh my gosh.
asking the questions, that's basically the work through of negotiating medical bills. And there will be times when you can't negotiate. Oftentimes I think it's like specialty services that I find, or just the cost of a physician specifically will be non-negotiable. Like, for example, when you have a baby, you'll have hundreds, not hundreds, but it feels like hundreds, lots of bills that come in the mail. Like once the hospital for the stay, and then I had like a separate bill for literally, it was just the cost of my anesthesiologist to walk in the room and give me the epidural. That bill was not negotiable. And I tried everything there, and they were basically just like, hey, like, that's what it costs for this man to come in this room. I'm like, okay, whatever. So some things you will find are just harder to negotiate than others, but in so many cases, you'd be surprised what you can save for bills when you just go through the right steps, ask the right questions, and make sure that there's not any errors on your bill.
If you're just, for people who are listening, if you're not watching the video version on YouTube and you're just listening in Spotify, just like to the audio, when you just said 1,200 down to 250, my jaw dropped, and it took like 30 seconds for me to close it back, because what the heck, just for filling out a
It's
form,
crazy.
you think about the number of people, myself included, who we just go about our day. We never negotiate anything. If you think about the amount of money that I have spent over the years that I could have negotiated away, like, I'm also sitting here thinking about all of the medical bills, because like you said, I've got lots of health stuff going on. The number of medical bills is crazy. And I remember back to when I had a surgery in the past, and I remember, or no, it wasn't a surgery, it was just a hospital stay, trip to the ER, for them to literally give me a Tylenol and be like, just wait till the pain goes away. I was like, okay, guys, thanks for that. I remember the Tylenol being like, I think it was like $2.50 a pill or something like that. It was insanity. And can you imagine if you only had like one Tylenol, but they put that you had 3? That's an extra $500 right there. And that's, first of all, I mean, that's crazy for a Tylenol. It's just nuts. But it's just, you think about how much it's just probably added up over these years, which reminds me, or makes me want to ask, have there ever been any like really insane negotiation stories that either you have had or that students in your course have had?
Yeah, I'll give one. I think I've given several that I've had. So I'm going to give one from a course student who was going through IVFs. Oh. Infertility treatments are very expensive, and more often than not, they're out of pocket and there's not insurance coverage. Sometimes if you work for a company that provides financial assistance for that, that's like a very lucrative benefit to have, but more often than not, you're not getting anywhere with insurance. So I had a course student who went through IVF and had, a bunch of crazy bills that insurance was not going to touch. She called and used some of the course scripts and was basically pushing for any sort of financial assistance. And I've never heard of this happening before, but you'd be surprised. So they said, yes, we do have some programs that are income driven. If you submit, she didn't have to submit like every last detail of her tax return, but she had to provide some sort of tax documentation that verified her income from a tax perspective. And she's a realtor, so she makes great money, but because she's self-employed and her MAGI naturally based on self-employment looked different than her top line income, she qualified for this financial assistance. And she was like, I almost didn't send it because I was like, there's no way, there's just no way I'm qualifying for this. And she sent it in, just thought, what the heck, see if I qualify. And she got, I can't remember what it was, but it was another crazy, I can look it up because I saved her testimonial, but it was another crazy, like multi-$1,000 bill down to like $150. So it's the medical bills are by far and away the craziest testimonials that I see. Medical bills and then salary. It is wild how many people will literally email the script that I give when they get an external offer and ask for a $15,000 increase, and just like, bam, the people say yes. So salary and medical bills, I would say, are the biggest. If you're a healthy individual, you know, that's a very fortunate place to be in. And hopefully you don't have a lot of medical bills to negotiate, but always keeping that information in your back pocket is impactful, because even as a healthy individual, you're probably in your life going to incur some sort of crazy medical experience, especially if you plan to have kids. It is wild what these bills are like just to sleep in a hospital bed for 3 days and have your newborn in the room with you. They actually charge you a separate, this is the funniest thing that I found in my first experience. They charge you a separate room and board fee of thousands of dollars, thousands, for your newborn who literally sleeps in a cart in the same room as you.
I've heard of this.
My newborn was in a plastic cart next to my bed in the same room as me, and he has a room and board fee of his own that's $7,000.
What's crazy is, right, like, and moments before, like hours prior, the baby was housed inside of you. And all of a sudden, just because they're earthside and they're literally a few inches in different position. Now, I've heard that, and I thought it was absolutely crazy.
Yeah. So anyways, we're all going to have, at least probably most of us are going to have a situation where we could probably significantly save some money on some medical bills. And that's another big area that I think so many people just think like, well, this is what my insurance company said is I have to pay. And the other thing that I would add, this is brand new this year, but the Consumer Financial Protections Bureau passed in January of 2025 that medical debt cannot be reported negatively on your credit score. So medical debt can be sent to collections, and it can still be in a position to where you do have to pay it. Like, it is debt that's on under your personal name, but it can no longer negatively impact your credit score because so many Americans struggle with medical debt. So how that plays into negotiation is, if you're working with a provider who will not negotiate whatsoever, this isn't something that I've attempted yet because this is new, but this is factual. If you let it go to collections, it's not going to impact your credit score. And most of the time, a collections agency, they're just trying to collect the money. So they're going to be easier to settle with than a provider who maybe was just like, hard no, we'll just send this to collections. So that's just another thing to keep in your back pocket. In addition, another rule is that any medical debt under $500 can't be sent to collections, period. So I'm not saying you should just not pay a bill, but it is important to know that in your back pocket. If you're trying to negotiate a $400 bill with a medical provider, it's a good little tidbit of information to know, they're pretty incentivized to give you some sort of discount because they literally can't send it to collections because it's less than $500.
Wait, that's so interesting. And I feel like we could talk about this for so long because there's so much more we could have covered in the salary stuff. I know when I bought a car, I talk to my parents all the time about how we didn't do a good job negotiating my car, either the trade-in value for my old car or the newer car. So I know that's a big thing. The house we could have went way more in depth to, but we will link the website to your course in the show notes of this episode so that people can go look at all of the different testimonials and stuff, because again, it is just such good information to have in your pocket for when these things inevitably do come up in your life. So yeah, this conversation has been so amazing. Can you let everybody know where they can find you to learn more?
Yes, I am Money Talk Mal on Instagram. I'm also Money Talk Mal on TikTok, but just know that, like I said, I'm a millennial. And I haven't made it on TikTok like Erin and Grace have yet. So I have a couple thousand followers, but that's actually a goal of mine this year to start posting more on TikTok. But I'm your Instagram girly, and I'm Money Talk Bell on Instagram. So I hope to see you there.
Okay, amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. We will link all of your resources and everything in the show notes of this episode. But thanks for tuning in, and until next week.